Now we're going to go into how to set up your integrated merchant service partner. To get to these integrations, you're going to log into your location, go to Settings, Initial Setup, Integrations, Merchant Service. You will see that the first option will default to Other. This is simply meaning that you can use any merchant service you would like, but we are only integrated with Fortis and Cash Practice. If you are not using one of our integrated merchant services, that is totally fine. But what that means is you'd have to run the payment in that merchant services website directly. And then you'd have to manually go into ChiroHD and input each payment into the patient's account as well. So at the end of the day, you would have to make sure that the payments ran in your merchant service match your ChiroHD collections at the end of the day. So you don't have to use one of our integrated merchant services. All that means though is it's a two-step process to run a payment. You have to run the payment in the merchant services account directly and then manually input the payment into the patient's profile as well. The first option we're going to go into is Fortis. So when I switch to Fortis, you can see that I get this message saying that you're switching your merchant service. This is by design so that there's a bit of a warning letting you know you're switching your account. Whether you use Fortis or Cash Practice, you do have to reach out to them directly and let them know that you will be using ChiroHD as your EHR. They will have to do a setup process on their end, and then I'm going to specifically talk about Fortis right now. And what Fortis will do is send you an email with a set of Fortis credentials. These are required in order to set up your integration in ChiroHD. So keep in mind, the set of credentials have to come from a Fortis email. There's not another way to receive the entire set of credentials. I do believe you may be able to get your Fortis location ID from your Fortis website, but you do have to get these specific set of credentials from an email from Fortis. The Fortis location ID will come from the email with the set of credentials. Payment sync start date is a field specifically for offices that were using Fortis in their previous EHR. And now they're switching to ChiroHD and they still want to use Fortis. The sync start date is saying, from this date forward, I want to sync my payments into ChiroHD versus my previous EHR. To set up your credentials, you'll click on this plus sign. You would select a user. We tend to suggest that you select the main provider in the office, the Fortis user ID, the Fortis API key, and the Fortis API hash key will all come from the one email that you get from Fortis with the set of credentials. So the email will contain these 4 credentials: location ID, user ID, API key, and API hash key. With Fortis, they just require one set of credentials for the entire office. So that's why we tend to recommend just selecting the main provider, setting their credentials in the appropriate field, and then setting as default. You do have to set as default, otherwise it will not work. With Fortis, you can get a set of credentials for every user in the office if you would like. However, it isn't required. You just have to have the one set of credentials marked as default, and anyone in the office can run payments. If you want every user to have a set of credentials, they have to be specific credentials for that user. Fortis would have to provide a different set for each person. You cannot copy the same set of credentials and just paste it into multiple users. That would break the integration. Now we're going to switch to Cash Practice, and again, I'm getting that warning. Cash Practice acts the same in theory as Fortis does in the fact that you have to reach out to Cash Practice directly and inform them that you will be using ChiroHD as your EHR. They will also provide you a set of clerk keys. These are the same concept as credentials. When you reach out to Cash Practice, they will ask you for an API key. And as you can see here, it says Give to Cash Practice. You would simply click to copy, and then you need to send that to Cash Practice when they request it. Then Cash Practice will provide you a Cash Practice ID, a Cash Practice member key, and then you would set up a payment sync start date. This is the same concept as Fortis in the fact that if you were using Cash Practice in your previous EHR and you switch to Kyra HD, this is simply stating from this date forward, I want payments to sync into Kyra HD versus my previous EHR. To set up the clerk keys, you will click on the plus sign, select the appropriate user, and then input the clerk key provided from Cash Practice. You do have to set one user as default. We tend to recommend this be the main provider in the office. With Cash Practice, though, they do require that every user in your office has a set of clerk keys. If you do not input a set of clerk keys for each user in the office, that person will not be able to run payments. So as compared to Fortis, you just had to have one set of credentials for the entire office. With Cash Practice, you have to have a set of clerk keys for each user. Otherwise, they will receive an error when they try to run a payment. You will see this bridge pay option. This is not an integrated option across the board for all of our offices, but I do want to touch on that. You will see the option listed, but it is not an integrated option across the board. We do have it in a test office right now, but it is not an option across the board. Once you set up your clerk keys or your credentials, you will have to make sure you go into your system dashboard and your payment types, and remember to make sure enable the merchant service that you are using. This should have been done in your system setup, but I'm going to touch on it again. You will go to your system dashboard, system settings, payment types. You may have to click show inactive. I have Fortis checked off, but if you're using Cash Practice, you want to make sure to check off Cash Practice. Right after you set up your integration, what does that mean? It still means there's some work to be done. Every patient that you have still has to have a contact created within Kyra HD. That officially links the integration, especially if you previously used Fortis or Cash Practice. We have to connect them to Kyra HD. So Fortis will do a mapping process on their end, and what they're simply doing is finding the patient from your previous system in their Fortis contact and finding who that patient should be in Kyra HD. This cannot happen until after you have performed your migration. But regardless whether they already had an account in your merchant service or they're new, you have to either create a new contact or map the contact. You click on this button in the patient profile. Create new would be creating a new contact. This would be a situation where maybe it's a brand new patient and you did not see them in your previous EHR, they didn't have a previous merchant account. So there's nothing to map or connect. You just need to create a brand new one. So you would just click create contact. If they were a patient in your previous EHR that had a merchant account, you would need to map it. We cannot go in and automatically map all of your contacts because if we map something incorrectly, that could affect where payments are going into what accounts. And so it's just a safer bet to make sure that you are mapping your correct patients to their previous account. Once a contact has been created, you'll see these buttons in the patient profile. If you have Fortis enabled, it'll say Fortis. If you have Cash Practice enabled, it'll say Cash Practice. But the Fortis contact will link you to their Fortis account where you can see saved cards, past transactions. This is also where you would set up the reoccurring billing. You would need to click on this button to set up reoccurring billing for Fortis or Cash Practice patients. This is also where you need to go if you need to process a refund. You have to go into the merchant service directly via this button in order to initiate a refund. Now we do sync it automatically, but you have to initiate the refund within the merchant services site. Sync with Fortis or sync with Cash Practice will force a sync between the two systems and double check Was there a payment made that we did not sync into CoverHD? This can happen time to time, where there's a disconnect in the two systems talking, and it can happen where a payment does not sync over into the patient's ledger. If it does, it's not a big deal. That's why this button is here. You just click Sync with Fortis. This button on its own will sync today. So if this was a payment in the past, just click in the drop-down menu and select the range that you're trying to sync. In practice, what a payment would look like is you would click on New Transaction and Payment. Now, if I have Fortis or Cash Practice as my integrated service, so once I set up that integration, it will default here. So you won't have to select it every time. The only time you'd have to select something if you're running a payment that is different than Fortis, so a cash or check. You would input the amount here, and then there will be prompts on the screen from Fortis or Cash Practice to run the card, scan the card, type in the card, if you want to save it as default, if you want to split a payment. So the prompts on the screen will take you through that. I cannot show you that right now as I don't have a test account in this location, but the prompts will lead you through how to finish the payment. But to start the payment, again, you're going to click on this New Transaction button on Patient Snapshot, Payment, and then it will default to your integrated merchant service. So again, keep in mind, you can use any merchant service that you would like, but we only have direct integrations with Fortis and Cash Practice. You're more than welcome to use any other service. You would just have to manually enter those payments into CoverHD.